We are continuing with the course. Awesome. So, in the previous hour, we talked about template attacks and timing attacks. So the timing attack gets one scalar out of every measurement, but it's getting a lot of measurements, and then you do some kind of statistics on it. The template attack gets one measurement, but it's very, very long, this very, very long vector. And then you have an army of decoders which kind of slice it. And each one of the decoders looks at a tiny little bit of data. And in the end, you get, you need to do a lot of processing after that. And then I told you can combine both of them. You can combine both of them to get something which I call high data complexity attack. And then you can use statistics, which is like you do it in the timing attack, but because you can look inside the measurement and not only at the end, you can overcome all sorts of countermeasures and get very, very powerful attacks done with the disadvantages that you need to motivate this attack model. So this hour, I want to spend on explaining and recalling the Vaizata attack, which the Vaizata method, which I taught you earlier to the course, just to review it. And then we're going to develop a DPA attack from beginning to end on AES. So DPA is the 90s version of the attack, and the more complex attack called CPA. I would prefer that I give you a good explanation of DPA, and then you can read the fantastic DPA book, which covers it, or you can look at all sorts of tutorials, or you can just say, hey, I can deal with it. I can just do DPA for the time being. As I said, you can do your homework assignment with DPA by itself. You'll just be less effective. Right. So who here remembers already the Vaizata method? Who remembers how it works? What do you do? How do you get the key? Okay, so it's nice. So I have some people who don't really like the poll. 5 steps, right? Okay. So this is the Vaizata method, and this is Vaizata here. You can see him on the top. Yeah, so they burnt they burnt Esther's grave a week ago. Like, this is current news. Yeah, so the Vaizata method, it's a statistic method which gets how do you get the secret out of the device using statistics. And what are the 5 steps? Is the 5 steps, is this like a meme that I don't know? Is it something, should I Google it later? Okay, maybe. So the first thing I need to do is make some assumption on the device in the test. And this isn't incredibly complicated reverse engineering. What we did in the timing attack, what did we do? We assumed that the device is using right to left exponentiation, and it's using Montgomery reduction, which is something which we can do using Kerckhoffs. And we also assumed that this device subtractions take more time. Okay, so this is something fair to do. And as you will see in DPA, we also make a very, very simple assumption about the implementation. Of course, it's much more simple than what we did for the template attack. We basically pulled apart the device and built an army of decoders. Very, very simple assumption. And then we do this inductive operation where we try to simulate the execution of the device on the test. So we guess a little part of the key. And then we try to say, if this was the key, how would it affect the execution? So in the case of the timing attack, we assume that that if we guess the key correctly, some of the computations will take a longer time to execute than the rest. So then we try to split our measurements into 2 sets. So we actually had 2 possible values for the key bit. It's a bit, so it could either be 0 or 1. And we said, okay, if the value is 0, then our measurements are going to be split up into two sets in a certain way. And if the measurement is 1, they're going to be split up in a different way. So there are two ways of splitting the measurements. Okay, two ways of splitting measurements. One way if we guess 0, and one way if we guess 1. It's not a complementary. So it's not, I'm not saying trace A goes here in 1 and here in 0. It's just two completely independent ways of splitting the traces into two heaps, right? And now what I said is we need to see if there is some kind of meaningfulness to this split. So if I say the Montgomery reduction is going to take a longer time to run, I assume that this set, when I assume there are more Montgomery reductions, it would take a longer time to run. So I could see that the runtime is higher. So what is the statistical method we use to see if our classification was meaningful? No, it's a little more than that. So DPA is also t-test, and CPA is something else, and I won't have time to explain CPA in any. I don't want to do a bad job of explaining. Okay, it's difficult enough to teach in the situation that it is. I don't want to stuff in a lot of material, so I'm going to teach you DPA, and I'm going to show you how to learn CPA. Okay, so what is the statistical method we used in the timing attack? What did we use? Anybody remember? We use students t-test, right? Student, a chemist, a beer brewer, and a chemist. It's a test that gets unpaired t-test. Thank you. You get two populations, and you say, how do I support the hypothesis that these are two different populations? And this is what we did in the textbook. What did we do in practice? In the trenches, we were trying to get the key out. What did we do? We had a nice engineering. What did we do? What was the engineering method we used to get to find out if our hypothesis was meaningful? Right. So we were doing something called distance of means. Yeah, distance of means. So we said, okay, we have two ways of splitting our measurements into two sets. We have the way which is supported by key guess 0 and the way which is supported by key guess 1. So we can calculate the mean of the two sets and see if the means are close together. It means it wasn't a good way to split. If the means are far apart, it was a good way to split. So we take the mean of all of the slower group, we take the mean of all of the faster group, and we see if there's a good distance between the two. And you saw that the nice paper that shows the practical timing attack. You saw that the distance of mean was staying pretty high, and then when we got the wrong guess, it immediately fell down, and then we decided that we have to backtrack. So distance of means, difference of means is a nice mechanism. So this is what I have to remind you about the Vaizata. And now I want to do DPA with Vaizata. So I'm going to do a MATLAB. Well, I'm going to do it now. I'm going to do the entire Vaizata method step by step using DPA. Okay. So I just want to start with what do we have in our hands? What does the analyst have when the analyst begins to attack the system? So first of all, what is our data set? We have a set of power traces. So we queried our device D times. Each time we gave the device a different plaintext and stuff that it's always the same key. The key is what we're trying to get out. So we gave the device a bunch of different plaintexts, and every time we stored the plaintext, and we got the power trace. So we got the power trace of size T, a very large power trace. So in the end, we have a matrix of size D times T. This is our traces, and we also have our plaintext inputs and ciphertext outputs, which are associated. Each trace has a plaintext with generated. And I am also saying these traces have to be aligned. And aligning the traces, we want all the times to be the same time. It's a very interesting engineering challenge. I don't have time to talk about it right now, but we really have to align the traces. So I'm doing D measurements. I really have to have these traces lined up really, really well. I'm not telling you how to do it. Now we need to make an assumption. As Oel is saying, what is the assumption? So the assumption is that there is some time in the middle of the encryption operation where the state is a function that we can simulate. So we need to guess a small part of the key. We guess some bits of the key. And we know the plaintext, and that means we can simulate this operation. Okay? And I don't know when this is going to happen. Again, this is not like the timing attack. This trace is very, very long. Most of the points of the trace are not where this intermediate result is occurring. But there's a very small segment in time where this intermediate result is happening. And this intermediate result is a function of the plaintext in a small part of the key, and we can simulate it. And we also assume that the power consumption depends on this value. So if we guess the key correctly, we can make some kind of assumption that the power consumption is a function of the plaintext in a small part of the key. What is this function? Is it a linear function, an increasing function, a switching function? We don't have the statistical strength to capture it using the DPA assumption. So with CPA, we could have said something smarter, but I'm just going to say it depends in some way. So because of this assumption, we're going to say that there's going to be somewhere in this huge trace, some point in time where the power consumption depends on our key guess. And this assumption will allow us to split our traces into two sets. In one set, there's going to be less power consumption, and in one set, there's going to be higher power consumption. And then we do distance of means, and we found out that there's a nice difference. We found the key. Great. Yeah, but again, we don't know which point in time this is. Most of the time, we're not looking at anything. So most of the time, we're not looking at this intermediate result at all. So we're going to get nonsense. So it's going to be a little more involved to actually do this attack, but all will be reviewed. Now, before I do the attack in practice, I want to find somewhere some really, really nice intermediate result that I can use. So this intermediate result, I need to find a point which I can simulate, and it mixes the plaintext and the key. So I want to now I want to spend a few minutes on going over the